Welcome back. I know it's been a long time since I've uploaded, it's been about 6 months, but there's a very good explanation for it. If you check out my video from January of 2023, I went into detail about a medical condition that I have. Long story short, in February of this year, I had another eye transplant. I had every intention of making a bunch of videos, and I did make some, but honestly, I didn't look great, and so I didn't want to put them out. Anyways, today we're back and I'm excited to talk about Fujifilm's new X-T50. Okay, before we get into the thick of things, I want to make one thing clear. This video is not sponsored at all. This camera was purchased with my own money. Fujifilm does not get to see this video, and all these thoughts are my own. So let's get right into it. This video is not going to be a review. I've only had a camera for 3 weeks, and so I've done a few shoots here and there. I can't give you my full thoughts on the camera just yet, but I have enough to give you a first impression. If you know what an X-T5 is, this camera is simply a baby X-T5. So rather than go through all the specifications, why don't I just tell you what is different from this camera and the X-T5. This camera is not aimed at professionals, but rather enthusiasts. So as a result, it's missing some features such as dual card slots. It does not have weather sealing. It can only shoot up to 1/4000th of a second with a mechanical shutter, but the electronic shutter is the same between this and the X-T5. It shoots 8 frames per second versus X-T5's 14 frames per second. It's got the older and smaller battery, which means the battery life is not as great. It cannot tether, which was a really big deal to me. And while it has the same video specifications, pardon the interruption, editing Tony here. So initially when I filmed this clip, I was misinformed and I thought that the X-T50 had record limits on the video, but it turns out that that's not true. The X-T5 and the X-T50 have the same video specs and there are no record limits. Obviously, given the size of the camera, it might overheat quicker because it's not as big and there's not a lot of ventilation for the X-T50, but on paper, as it stands right now, there are no record limits. The video specifications are identical. Okay, back to the video. If you are an enthusiast and you're looking specifically at image quality, you're looking at the X-H2, you're looking at the X-T5, and you're looking at the X-T50, I would say specifically for those individuals, go with the X-T50. The reason being is it shares the same X-Trans5 40 megapixel sensor as those two other cameras, and you'd save a significant amount of money. One thing that I found with the older Fujifilm cameras that I shot with was the white balance would skew to cooler images with a touch of magenta, which is fine because you could easily edit it, especially when you're shooting in RAW. But for myself, I like when I have a great starting point and the camera selects the correct white balance. And with these new Fujifilm cameras, I love the white balance that comes right out of the camera. I know a lot of you shoot Fujifilm for the film simulations, but personally for myself, I still shoot in RAW because I like to edit my images. And so once again, starting from the correct white balance is really important to me, and these newer cameras do a really good job at it. So once again, I'd say if you're coming from one of the oldest sensors, this is personally for me a worthy upgrade. The second part of image quality is that 40 megapixel sensor. If you watch my previous videos, you'd know that I'm not a big fan of high megapixel cameras. The simple reason is storage. I keep all my files, and because I shoot in RAW, these file sizes are big. I don't want to keep having to purchase a lot of hard drives, and so cameras with lower megapixels is fine for me. That being said, I can still appreciate the 40 megapixels I'm getting out of this sensor, especially when doing street photography. Because of what I look like, it's not that great for me to approach people and be so close to them. So if I'm a little further and I take photos, I can still crop into the composition that I specifically want. So there are some advantages of having that 40 megapixels. You're able to crop and not lose much detail. Let's discuss the very important topic of autofocus. When it comes to the X-T50, it's got the same processor and all the great autofocus algorithms that are found in the X-T5 and the X-H2. Now, when we talk about autofocus, we really need to dissect it and break it down into two categories. There is autofocus speed and there's autofocus intelligence. When it comes to autofocus speed, the X-T50, the X-T5, the X-H2, the X-H2S, all of those cameras are extremely fast when it comes to speed. When most reviewers are talking about autofocus, they're really talking about the autofocus intelligence part of the game. We know that it is capable, it's fast. Now, how intelligent is it? I'll make my point by comparing it to Sony, Canon, for example. If you select the wide area autofocus on Sony or Canon, 9 times out of 10, those cameras are intelligent enough to select the subject that you want to focus on, even if you give it very little direction. It just knows what you want to focus on and it sticks to it. With the X-T50, the autofocus is leaps and bounds better than any camera that came from the past. However, when it comes to the intelligence, there is a lot of user input required. You're going to have to select the right autofocus mode, select the right brackets in order to autofocus on the subject that you want, because if you put it in that wide area autofocus, Fujifilm, I don't know what, but it tends to jump to everything that I do not want to focus on. So it's either something in the background. If there are multiple faces, it's going to select maybe the furthest face away. I don't know how it works. All I can tell you is I own all the brands, and when it comes to Canon and Sony and now Nikon for the most part, I find that they are able to just select the right subject that you're looking at versus Fujifilm. If you leave it in that wide area autofocus, it won't necessarily select the thing that you're looking for. So in my personal experience, you are going to have to provide it some input so that it can specifically focus on the thing that you're looking for. And that's my thoughts on it. Okay, so that first portion of the video was filmed 2 weeks after I purchased the camera, whereas this portion of the video is being filmed 2 months later. I've been able to take this camera on 2 different vacations, and so I have more thoughts. Earlier, I called this camera a baby X-T5, which it kind of is, but really, it is a competitor to the X100 VI, and let me explain why. If you look at the internals of the X100 VI and the X-T50, they're quite identical. There are only 2 major differences between both cameras. Number 1 is the body styling, and number 2 is the interchangeable lens. If you go to retailers to purchase these 2 cameras, you'll find that the X-T50 and the X100 VI are both sold out at most retailers. However, the wait list for the X100 VI is nearly half a year to a year versus the X-T50, which is about a month. If you talk to individuals who want the X100 VI, a lot of them say that they love the fact that they don't have to have decision paralysis because it has only one focal length, and so they want to stick to that one focal length, and it provides a lot of simplicity to their lives. However, if you do fall into that camp, consider this. You could buy a 23mm f2 or 1.4, stick it on the X-T50 and call it a day. However, the great thing is, if you find yourself loving this hobby and wanting to grow in this hobby, instead of having to sell your camera and get into an interchangeable lens camera, you can instead buy this X-T50, and if you are one of those individuals who want to grow in the hobby, then you have the ability to interchange the lenses. So, going back again, both cameras internally have the same functionality. However, one allows you to change lenses, and so if you love the hobby, you want to grow into the hobby, and you want to get different types of looks provided by different types of lenses, you have greater flexibility with the X-T50 versus the X100 VI. The X100 VI has no other advantages over this X-T50. Now, I really love this camera, but I've used it for 2 months, and I've got some thoughts on a few downsides that I've realized over time. First of all, let's talk about that film simulation dial. While I appreciate who it was made for, it wasn't made for me. I don't shoot in JPEG, I actually shoot in RAW and edit all my photos. I find that the dial is very easy to switch. When taking it out of my bag, it has been bumped so many times, and I find myself shooting in a film simulation that I never intended to shoot in. So I appreciate the dial for those who it was meant for, but for someone in my personal use case, it doesn't fit, I don't like it, and it's easily switched. Let's get into my second complaint. If you think about who this camera is really built for, it's built for beginners, travelers, individuals really getting into photography. And so you'd think that they would simplify the user face enough such that individuals coming in can easily find things. And I don't find that that is the case with this camera, especially if you want to switch into video. The video setting is hidden behind the drive button. Because I've shot Fujifilm before, I knew that. However, if you think about somebody who's new to photography, it's not intuitive that switching to video would be hidden behind that button, and it would take them reading the manual or having to Google it to figure it out. Now, my third complaint has to do with the battery. I understand why they went with the older battery because it's smaller and it allows them to keep this camera compact. But they did increase the size of this camera slightly by adding a much deeper grip, and I think that it would have served them better if they made that grip even bigger, because it would allow individuals to better hold this camera. But in addition to that, they'd have been able to use the newer battery, which has much better battery life, because I find that the battery on these cameras are not so great, and having to carry a lot of spare batteries, especially on vacation, is not an ideal situation. My fourth complaint has to do with the location of the battery door, SD card, and the quarter thread. Now, the quarter thread is in the center of the camera, as it is with most cameras, and I understand why it's that way. However, because it's in such close proximity to the battery door, it's actually hard to access your battery and your SD card without having to take the plate off the bottom if you have the camera mounted on a tripod. And if you're in a situation where you're using a tripod for your shoot, especially in a video shoot, you'll have to essentially take the camera off the tripod, take off the plate, and then you'll get access to your battery and SD card slot. And if you're going back and forth with changing batteries or taking your SD card out often, it is a bit of a nuisance. Last but not least is that 6.2K video. I appreciate that Fujifilm included it in this camera instead of kneecapping the camera. However, do note that with that 6.2K video, it does come in with an additional crop. On top of the fact that the sensor itself is already a 1.5 times crop from full frame. So all I'm saying is you need to watch your focal length and have a variety of lenses or use a zoom lens, because when you shoot in 6.2K versus 4K, your focal length is going to be slightly different. When it comes to video, the only times I'm shooting video is for these YouTube videos. I'm not a filmmaker by any means, and I don't really shoot a lot of home videos, and so I can't comment a lot on the video. What is important to me to have in video is 10-bit color. I need the ability to shoot 4K or above, and I need to ensure that the files are malleable. And this camera has all of those things. What you're seeing right now is being shot on the X-T50. I'm shooting in 6.2K, 10-bit video, and the files coming out of these cameras are just as malleable as the files that I get from my Sony A7 IV. I am not saying that these files compare directly to the A7 IV, because the A7 IV has a full frame sensor, so naturally it'll be better in low light. What I am saying is, for my purposes and for the types of videos that I shoot, I am getting similar results with this X-T50, so the video, in my opinion, is very good. So in conclusion, who should really buy this camera? Number one, if you're looking for an X-T5, but you want to save a little bit of money and the dual card slots are not important to you, then get the X-T50. Number two, if you want a small, compact travel camera that is very lightweight, once again, get the X-T50. It shares the same sensor as the flagship X-T5 and X-H2, so image quality is going to be identical. Number three, if you're looking to purchase an X100 VI and it's not in stock where you are, it's actually better to get this camera. The internals are the same, it still has a great retro look, and you have the ability to grow with this camera because you are able to use interchangeable lenses. Outside of that, I would like to say that this camera ticks all of my boxes, and to the surprise of no one, I am actually going to keep it. It has been a great travel camera, and I'm excited to make more content on the X-T50. If you enjoyed what you saw today, please consider giving this video a like and hit that subscribe below for more videos coming out soon. Thanks again for watching. Take care.